talking about how do we change? How do we transform from our old life into our new life? And that this isn't something that just happens once. This is something that happens in our lives, that God continually transforms us. And in my life, I've noticed that different seasons bring up different challenges, and with those challenges bring up in my life different inadequacies. The temptations and struggles that I struggle with now are different than when I was 19 or 16 or 13 or even 30. And I know from following very wise people that are ahead of me in life that this is something that continues. That God is constantly saying to us, I want to transform you and make you into the person that I designed for you to be. And so we've been talking about how does that happen. There was a Dorito commercial a few years ago, a Super Bowl commercial. Maybe some of you guys will remember. It's one of my favorite. Dorito seemed to always have good commercials. They had this clever idea where this Amish family for the first time walks into a mall. They'd never been to a mall, Amish don't have any electricity or have kind of kept themselves from the world. And so they walk in and they're just seeing all this stuff, and there's the Dorito vending machine. And they just can't believe it. And as the son and the dad, big long white beard, see this vending machine, they think, oh my goodness, you just put some money in here, Mom doesn't have to cook or anything like that. You just put some money in here and press a button and out comes Doritos. Well, as they're trying to figure it out, this lady comes in with a cane and she presses the button and gets a Dorito bag out. And they're like, wow, this is amazing. And they go to get their Dorito bag, but they watch her. She goes into an elevator. They've never seen an elevator. She goes into the elevator with her Dorito bag, and the elevator doors close. And when the elevator doors open back up, this 20-something, very fit, beautiful lady walks out. And the scene goes to the dad looking at his son saying, where's your mom? Go find her. And the scene closes as this older Amish woman, kind of heavy set, is in the elevator, and her husband has Dorito and Cool Ranch, and he says, here, try Cool Ranch, and he's just standing waiting for his wife to come out transformed into this beautiful woman. And it's this idea of transformation, is I think all of us want to be better people. We want to be more generous. We want to be filled with faith. We want to be filled with hope. We want to have the kind of character that stands through trials and tribulations. We want to have patience and perseverance and kindness. We all long for these things. But often our culture says it's a quick fix. All you got to do is just find the right door, the right elevator. Let's come to the right church service, pray the right prayer, buy this 30-day trial of something, and you can be this person. You can have this transformed life. But followers of Jesus know something very different, and that is that our transformation comes as we spend time and we submit ourselves to Jesus' way of life. And that transformation happens over a lifetime. But it begins with some commitments that we have to make. One of those we talked about is prayer. We talked about this at the beginning of the year, that we will not transform into people that are more like Jesus if we don't spend time in prayer with Jesus. It won't happen. Another thing we talked about is our minds will never change from negativity to thoughts of faith, or from lustful thoughts to thoughts that are pure, without reading God's Word. And so we spent a couple weeks actually, talking about the transformation of our minds, that our minds are renewed by the transformation by God as we put God's Word into our minds, Word into our hearts, and we start to think and understand that anything's possible with Christ. We start to see the world differently. And so each of these pieces, we talked about how important it is for us to have community and relationships with one another. That the way that Jesus designed this whole life with him to be transformed is that it takes community. That we need one another. It's not just an isolated faith. We need to have a personal relationship with Jesus, but that life needs to be shared with others. And so we talked about that. Last week we talked about confession. That is so important, that we own up to the things in our lives that need help and the sins in our lives and confess those to trusted people. And today we're going to talk about something that I think has been one of the most powerful things in my life for me, changing habits, changing the way that I look at things. And yet it's one of those things that we resist more than anything. And it's this word accountability. Now, accountability means that I ask somebody else to remind me that I'm accountable for my actions. Okay? Let me say that again. It's somebody else in my life saying, I want to remind you that your life, you are accountable for. Sometimes we get this wrong. We think accountability partners are people who are holding me accountable. They're the police holding me accountable. But really, accountability in our lives says this: remind me that I'm going to have to give an answer for my life someday. Help me not to forget that I'm accountable. Now, accountability is a very powerful thing in human lives. Have you ever been driving down the highway, especially between here and let's say Fairplay, and people are passing and people are driving crazy, and a police officer is in that mix all of a sudden. He pulls off from one of those county roads and he gets in the mix, and all of a sudden there's just like all of this awareness, people are driving, they're not driving 78, they're driving 65, and they're not passing on double yellows, and everything kind of changes when there's a police officer in the mix. And that doesn't mean that we're any less accountable for how we drive with the police officer that they're not. We think we're going to get caught when the police officer is there. We realize that accountability is imminent, okay, not far off. And so this happens in every sphere of our lives. We have this tendency since the beginning of time, since Genesis, to hedge. The first sin with Adam and Eve, God finds them in the garden, and he asks Adam, where have you been? And why are you hiding? The first thing that we see in humanity is that he blames who? His wife, right? And that's been happening ever since. And then Eve says, it wasn't me, it was the serpent, right? The serpent can't talk, so he can't blame it on anybody else. But we know that he represents Satan, and that Satan has blamed God for his actions and all kinds of things. So we have this tendency, it's in us. It's in us to try to get out of things. It's in us. Even though in our minds we say, I want to grow. I want to be a more disciplined person. I want to be a Christ follower. I want to share my faith. All of these things. Without some sort of accountability in our lives, most of us do not change. And that's just the reality of it is. Now, Jesus and Zacchaeus is a great story about accountability and the sweetness that God comes to us even when we're sinners. In Luke 19, 1 through 10, we see this story. This is a story of transformation. This is a story of someone who has not had any accountability in their life. The Roman government basically said to tax collectors, look, you're going to get a certain amount of money, but if you can get anything over the top from people, that's your business. And so tax collectors were hated, and they took as much money as they could get away with. And they used power and they used manipulation to pull money out of this community, and they were hated. And even Zacchaeus' own standard says, yeah, I was taking things from people, and no one held him accountable. Now the king of the universe walks into his neighborhood, and there is this intrigue for Zacchaeus. I have to believe that it got tiresome being a man in a community who was hated. I mean, can you just kind of imagine that? Some of you in here have gone through seasons in life when there was gossip being told about you, or you made a mistake, and it's a small town, and it's kind of hard to walk through that. We know that kind of feeling. I remember in high school making a really big mistake in in high school. Before I had my license, I stole a car and with a friend, and we wrecked, and it was all over the place. And police were involved, and Buena Vista's, just about the same size as Buena Vista. And so every place I walked into, it was kind of like, people either wouldn't talk to me or they have a sly remark. And it took a long time for me to kind of get over that. Just about the time I got over that mistake, I made another mistake. And, lost my license for another reason. I'll tell that story in a minute. And, but I was one of those kids where, for my parents and our family, it was kind of like, oh, that kid, You feel that pressure. You feel, and it's not a good feeling. And it's easy to make mistakes, and it's easy to try to hide from these things. And so Zacchaeus was in that place, but he's intrigued by Jesus. And we don't know why he was intrigued by him. Maybe it was the stories he had heard of. Maybe he was there just because he was curious. But he wanted to see Jesus. And when he sees Jesus, I wonder in his mind if he thought, I'll get a glimpse of him because I want to see who everyone's talking about, but who am I? And probably if Jesus does see me, I'm going to get a tongue lashing. I'm going to get chewed out. I'm going to get in trouble for something. But this story we've heard so many times. Jesus sees Zacchaeus and he calls him down from the tree, and he says this. Jesus came to the place. He looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. This is Zacchaeus. There was something inside of him that longed to be right with God. He longed to know that he was okay, and that there was going to be life on the other side of his sin. It says that the crowd said when they saw it that they all grumbled. And this is what they said about Jesus. He has gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, after they had spent time, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to you. This word behold, usually that's used in Scripture. It's used quite a few times. It's used when an angel shows up. It means that there once was darkness, or once there was angels around us, but all of a sudden, behold, the angel made himself clear. It's like taking something from vagueness to clarity. And it's an interesting word that Luke uses. But it's like Zacchaeus came to the table. He shows up. The true Zacchaeus, the Zacchaeus who could live in honesty, who could live a generous life, showed up in the presence of Jesus. And it says, behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said today to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. He reminds him, this is who you really are. You're not a tax collector. You don't work for Rome. You're God's child. You are God's child. I've been in some accountability relationships that were not healthy, and I've been in a lot that were really healthy. And the people that have walked with me to make me a better man, my wife is a huge person in this, has done it from this posture, from this story. Zach, I know that what you're doing in your life right now that's negative is not the whole story. It's not who you truly are. You are God's man. You are somebody who's been redeemed by him. You have courage to step out of the darkness that you're in at this time. Come forward. One of those people in my life when I was growing up and I was in high school, after I had made all of these mistakes, was that this youth pastor named Brian Wilson. And I kind of just sunk myself into sports because it's a place that I kind of fit in. But I was really confused about my faith. I didn't know if I believed in God. I didn't know if I could be forgiven for lots of different things that I had done. But Brian was one of these guys who saw me in a crowd, and he just, from the very moment that he met me, he just said, Zach, there's more to your story. There's more to your story. You're not a thief. You're not a liar. You've done those things, but there's more to you. And he just pursued me. It took about a year of high school for Brian to keep showing up to my games, and when he did, he'd kind of break the awkwardness and come and say hello, and finally got me to start going back to church and to youth group. And after I did, I felt like it was way too soon, but he said, Zach, I want you to share your story. And I remember that day I shared the story. I shared that story with kids that knew me, knew who I really was, how I was really acting. And it was a really hard moment to stand up and say to those people, hey, this is all the things that I've done. You know all about this. But this was a turning point for me when I shared my testimony in high school. I remember saying, but I don't want to be that guy anymore. And I've made this decision that I'm going to follow Christ. There was a lot of stuff still in me, a lot of hiding, but there was a change because I came out public with my faith. And when I did that, there's accountability, isn't there? From out of hiding into the open. This is who I want to be. Now, Zacchaeus hasn't done any of this stuff yet. I have this hunch it wouldn't be in the scriptures if he hadn't followed through. It would have been one of the many discarded stories. We don't know if he follows through or not, but the fact that it's in here and the fact that Luke records it, and he records it later in life. You know, sometimes we forget that the people who wrote these scriptures wrote it in the time when these people were still alive. Zacchaeus was still someplace. And so when Luke writes this down, there had to be the sense of, I think, you know that Zacchaeus character that's here and has become so generous? Maybe you didn't know this, kids, because this is probably 40 years later. Zacchaeus, who's now known for being one of the most generous people around, he was a scoundrel. You know, he was a thief. He was a tax collector. He worked for the Roman government. Who knows what Zacchaeus is doing now? But something, I believe, Luke said, you know, that Zacchaeus character. He's a different person. I remember going to my 20-year reunion. I didn't have a 10-year reunion because my class was too dysfunctional. But nobody answered their emails. And so we finally got together at a 20-year celebration, and this was just this other season. You know, everybody wants to know, what are you doing, Zach? And, well, I'm a preacher. No. Not possible. Not possible. But those were defining moments for me. This idea of accountability is so powerful in our lives when we say this is who I am. God showed me something. I want to be different. I don't want to be angry anymore. I don't want to be a taker anymore. I don't want to be in this cycle of sin anymore. I want to be someone different. And Jesus does this in such a way that is so beautiful because he sees all of us. We're completely laid open before us. But he doesn't do it with any kind of judgment with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus knows he's judged. Zacchaeus knows what he's done wrong. Usually we do. But he's been invited into a different life by the one who created him. You are a child of Abraham. You are a child of Abraham. So for us, what does this look like? In 1 Timothy 4, 8, and 9, it says that for physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promises both for the present life and the life to come. This is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. One of the things that was going on with young Timothy is that he was being looked down upon for his age. And Paul's talking to Timothy, and he's saying this. It would be easy for you just to slack back. It would be easy for you to kind of fit into the mold that people have been giving to you. You're just too young. You're not really a pastor that can have authority in my life. You know, this is it. But he says, I want to call you to something greater. That you have the value of following Christ, and godliness has value for all things, holding promises both for the present life and the life to come. This is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. This godliness, this accountability to be who God has called me to be, it has value. You know, I recently, decided, hey, I'm going to get back in shape, and during my sabbatical, I started running again, eating better, and was on this just great, track back to getting physically healthy. And so went through Christmas, and about the middle of January, I got the flu. And I was out for 2 weeks, and then I couldn't breathe, and it's cold outside, and I love food, and so I started eating lots of food again. And so this last week, I was kind of, it's nice outside, I'm going to get back to running. And it is horrible, okay? It's horrible. You get out there and it's windy and it's cold and, you just want to go eat Doritos and sit by the television. And so, I did my couple of miles and it felt like 50 miles. Right? I mean, we're talking 3 weeks before this. I went out and did about 5 miles. I was feeling really good. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And I'm back. I feel like I'm back like 2 years. Are you with me? Anybody go through this? You're kind of like, why should I do this again? I think I'm fat and happy. I'm okay with this. I don't want to go through this anymore, especially in Buena Vista, and it's cold, and, it's just so hard. And this is such encouraging news for me because he says this passion to serve Christ, this passion to say, God, I want to be transformed into your image. It has eternal value. It has eternal value. When today, maybe the Holy Spirit comes on you and says this, gosh, I've been greedy. And the invitation today is just to say to somebody else, for some accountability to remind, I want to grow in generosity this year. I want to grow in generosity. Would you pray for me that I would become a more generous person? And what he's saying to Timothy is this: when we take these strides to become more like Jesus, when we trust his grace in our lives, it has eternal value. Forever, right? It's not like our human bodies. Our spirits, even as our bodies grow weak, our spirits can grow stronger. And this is going to affect in the eternity. If I run next week, it's not going to affect my heavenly body. Someday, right? It's not, okay? It's good for us to run. I'm not telling anybody that they should slouch back into where I've become as a sloth, but I'm saying that we often put a lot of energy around our physical well-being, and that's a good thing. And we often just kind of think, well, my spirit, I'll get there. I think if I sit in church, and sing some songs, I'll eventually become more Christ-like. That's what this is like. It's like saying, I'm going to buy a Peak membership, and I'm going to sit in there and eat Doritos and watch everybody work out. And just think, I think I'm going to get skinny by watching, those guys on the treadmill. Man, you guys are good. That's the idea. That's the idea that Paul's trying to say to Timothy. You know that in your physical body, you have to have accountability. You have to have some strategic methods to get you from A to B. It's the same way with our physical bodies as it is with our spiritual bodies. But he's saying this is so much more important. The value is not only for your life, your family here, but in eternity. You're never going to look back at this Sunday and this be the Sunday that says this. You know what I decided? I decided that in the mornings I'm going to get up, and instead of reading the news, I'm going to feast on God's word. And you share that with somebody else in here and say, hey, would you check on me next week and see how I'm doing with that? And you start right now for the rest of your days just taking a step towards God and reading his word and understanding his word. This is what Paul's saying. You're never in eternity going to wish that you had that time back. So, why do we do this? Hebrews 10:24 says this, and let us consider how we may spur one another on to love and good deeds. That this is part of being a body of Christ together, reminding us of who we are. So the first thing that I want to remind us of, accountability helps me to do things I would not do by myself. And self-initiated accountability, I have a genuine desire to grow in some area of my life. But I know because of my weakness or my habits or forgetting, I'm just likely to drift. So you say to a friend, would you check in with me? Would you give me some feedback? You ask your wife, I feel like I'm just always angry at the kids. And I feel like I'm just short-tempered. And I just feel like I come home and I don't have anything to give. And I want to be a different man. Would you just give me some feedback on how I'm doing? Would you just be honest with me? Okay? These are true life stories from me. Would you be honest? Would you ask me how it's going? And here's what's so amazing. Just that statement to somebody that we trust starts to change our awareness about how we walk into the house, about how we respond to our children, about how we respond to our wife. Just that. When we give permission to somebody else to say, this is my intent, man, it has power in our lives. The same kind of power as the police officer pulling in, to a whole line of people. It's like, oh, wait a second. I all of a sudden remembered I have a speedometer. Accountability helps me do things I would not do by myself. The second things that accountability does, asking for accountability takes a lot of courage. I think it took a lot of courage for Zacchaeus to let Jesus come to his house. I don't know that for sure, but I'm sizing this whole thing up. When Luke says that the people around him were angry at Jesus because he ate with sinners, I think for Zacchaeus this had to be a big deal of exposure. I wish this wasn't 10 verses. I wish that this story had 10 chapters. Wouldn't you have loved to know the conversations that happened in that house? What did they talk about? What does Zacchaeus' wife think about all this? Did they check in? Hey, we should have a check-in because you're about ready to give away half of our stuff, you know? There's all kinds of things that happens, but this takes a lot of courage for us. And here's one of the reasons. Ever since the fall, humanity loves to hide. This is in us, guys. We want to hide. We want to be secretive. This is not our best selves, but this is our sinful selves. We hide, we cover, and we think, man, if I'm exposed and people know what's really going on inside of me, I'll be judged. But here's the amazing thing for us this morning is Jesus already knows. And let me tell you this, the friends in your life, they already get it. If you have an anger issue, your friends know. You're not going to be like, hey, you guys probably didn't notice, but I kind of lose my temper a lot. Oh, thanks. Brilliant. Where'd you read that? I struggle with sarcasm, and sometimes I use sarcasm to make myself feel better and other people feel worse. And you guys probably haven't noticed that, but I want to work on that. And people are like, duh. So this accountability piece, we start to tell ourselves that we're invisible. I don't think anybody knows that I have this issue. But we know. And this is what's great about the community of faith. We still love you. We still love you. But we just don't want one another to stay here. Patrick Lencioni is a great consultant. He's also a Jesus follower. He wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Anybody read that book? If you're a business owner, you should read that book. Or you work at a business, you should read this book. It's a narrative about culture and life within a workplace. And it's an incredible book. But he kind of says the main reasons that teams, and I think this is families or churches, get off mark or don't reach their potential or self-destruct. First is lack of trust, fear of conflict, the absence of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. But he says this, the number one problem teams, and I would say families and churches have, is avoidance of accountability. They have more problems with that than they do of all the other 4 dysfunctions put together. We're just afraid of this. It takes so much courage to say, I want to be different, and to share that with somebody else. Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if working for the Lord, not for human masters. And this is the real crux of this. If we really believed that we were in the presence of God all the time, and he knew, and he sees, and he was present, this idea of accountability and what we're reaching for and who we want to be would make so much more sense to us. But we honestly believe that we're invisible. We honestly believe that we've somehow tricked God, that he doesn't really see what's going on. We've tricked other people. But this is so powerful. No matter what we're doing in our lives, don't do it for human eye service. If we come out of here and say, well, I want people to think of me better, or I want my community to think I'm a better person, or I want people to clap for me or whatever, it doesn't have eternal value. How we work with all our hearts is this, not for human masters, but as we're working for the Lord. And this changes everything, does it? And I think when we let other people into our struggles and we ask them to check in on us, it's not that person has so much power. As believers, we recognize, oh, wait a second, I'm going to have to give an account for all of this anyway someday. Wouldn't I rather have a weekly check-in then wait 40 years and get in front of Jesus, and he pulls out the list, and he's kind of like, what? When I became senior pastor here, the beginning of that was real tumultuous. And the previous pastor that had been here had taken some things that I shared confidentially and shared that with other people, and he accused me of some things. And the things that he accused me of in my life had been true. And the elders received this information, and they came and talked to me, and they said, this person has said these things about you. Are they true? And here's why I'm senior pastor. As I was able to say, yes, those have been struggles in my life, but my wife and my accountability partner and other people in my life know all about this. I've been an open book. And the elders went and checked in with those people and said, is this true? Has Zach worked through this? It was an attack on my character. But what saved me through that fire was that I didn't do that alone. And I was able to say, yeah, a few years ago, that was a struggle I was having in this. And when I was struggling, these people knew about it. And there was an open book. And it built trust in my life instead of what the enemy really wanted to do was discredit me. And I think there's a similar piece in that when we all stand before Christ. All we have done has been laid open. But can you imagine the freedom of going, oh yeah, that was me. I was greedy. I was a thief. I was angry. I was caught in lust. I was caught in there. And can you imagine the witnesses of saints coming around us and going like, oh yeah, he was. God knows. But I've walked through this. People have walked through this. It's an open book of who I am. But guys, I got to tell you, this takes so much courage. It takes courage for me. I still avoid this at times. It takes courage to do this. One of the neat things going on in my life right now is to watch Isaac, my son, grow this last year. And I asked him if I could share this. But, last year, Isaac playing basketball, he got a few technicals. He's a lot more like his dad than his mom. And lost his temper sometimes, just passionate about games or whatever. And softball, or when he played baseball too, had this tendency to hit the ground when he got angry. And I was like, man, you're going to break your fist. And if you break your fist, you're not going to be able to play baseball. And he went to a camp. Him and Tucker went to a camp this last summer. And they didn't just talk about sports, but they talked about the importance of dealing with your anger. And they said, you know what? They gave him just this really simple thing. When you get angry, hit your hand twice. One of those is to let go of what happened in the past. And the other is to say, I'm going to move into the future. I'm going to use this mistake to help me go forward. And then they encouraged him, do this as a team. Share this as a team with one another. And this year, I know the basketball guys in here have had a really rough year, but I got to say, these boys did an amazing job with that this year. And if there was ever a year that you would have been angry because of the bad refs, this would have been a year. But I want to say Tucker and Isaac, because they're here, they had a hard game last night. Man, these guys have grown a lot. And one of the ways they've grown is to say this. At the end of the game, how'd you do with your anger? And if you watch them, man, they'll get upset at themselves. They do this, they do this, they do this. And those guys at the end, they encourage one another. Man, you could have lost it. You could have gotten a technical. What would that have done? The power of accountability. And I've watched these guys grow. I watched Isaac grow so much in this area, and it's helped me in my own journey with anger. I've watched him. And I watched these guys in the court, and they're training to be men of God, not just basketball players, and they're doing the hard work. And it's been really cool to watch that. But it takes a lot of courage to do this. Number 3, accountability is not just about avoiding bad, but pursuing God's best for me. I think sometimes in the church, and I've been a part of this, it's all about, press on each other to stop doing bad things, and we do. We want to get rid of bad situations in our lives. But I love the story of Zacchaeus, because Jesus comes to his house not to tell him how bad he is. Zacchaeus knows. He feels the look of that community on him. He knows how much he's screwed up. Jesus comes to his house to remind him, you're a child of Abraham. You're not just a thief. You're not just a tax collector. I see so much more in you. And having someone in our lives that believes that we're children of God, that believes that we have giftings, that believes that we're not just who we are now, that we're not just stuck, that there's life at the end. There's people that are patient with one another. Psalm 32:9 says, but do not be like the horse or mule which have no understanding, but must be controlled by a bit and bridle, or they will not come to you. We have this steer right now that is like the other word for a mule. And it just hates to be led. It just hates to be led. It just goes after us. It's just constant. This could be so easy for you. You could become, a very kind, generous steak someday. Instead, you're going to be tough and you're going to be bristly. Don't you want to be a better steak? But I'm reminded every time I try to get out there with that steer, man, this is my heart towards God when I decide I'm going to do life my way. And it could be so much more joyful. God has something better for us if we let him lead. Anne Graham, I love this. You guys have probably all heard this, but on her tombstone, Billy Graham's wife, it says, just her name and how long she lived. And it said, end of construction. Thank you for your patience. Timothy was too young. This is from John Ortberg. Timothy was too young. Abraham was too old. Moses was too slow of speech. Aaron was too glib. Elijah was too depressed. Gideon was too scared. Esau was too hairy. Jonah was a runaway. Joseph was a convict. Rahab was a prostitute. Sarah laughed at God. Noah got drunk. Samson had an impulse control disorder. Peter sank. Jacob lied. Thomas doubted. Zacchaeus was greedy, corrupt, and vertically challenged. What's your excuse? What is it? Jesus doesn't see the excuse. He sees what he's created you to be. And I just want to encourage us. Man, just take a step in this. Maybe you're already in an accountable relationship, but not in a, hey, feel sorry for me, but hey, God's stirring me to be different. Would you check in with me? Would you pray for me about this? And I don't think there's any more incredible way to transform a community than grace-filled accountability. And this is accountability not just doing something, but accountability to remind one another, no, you're children of Abraham. You're bought with a price. This cross wasn't for anything. It was for you, not just to forgive your sins, but to give you hope and a future, to give you resurrection power, to make you the dad, the employee, the employer, the disciple of Jesus, the son, the basketball player, the football player, the grandma, the grandfather that God imagined you to be. Maybe it's something in recovery. Maybe it's a cycle of addiction. Maybe this is your day. Find one person that you know and trust and tell them you're committed to doing the next right thing. And if we do this, if we embrace God's gift of accountable living, this is what I believe in the now, not just eternity, but we will have greater integrity as a community. We'll have more humility, more self-awareness, stronger character, fewer regrets. We will become better friends, better workers, better family members, better human beings. We will live this life with greater transparency and freedom and have a better shot one day at hearing these words from our Lord Jesus. Hey, well done. Good and faithful servants. I just think, hey, we're going to go to heaven someday, and just like Zacchaeus, Jesus is going to sit down with us at our table. We're already going to be accountable for our lives. Why don't we start now with one another? Let's pray. Father, thank you for just this. This is simple. This is not rocket science. Nobody walked in here today and got new information. I just wonder about who Zacchaeus would have become if he wouldn't have ever let Jesus into his life and share with that group of people, here's the vision that God's given me for my life. There's countless Zacchaeuses out there. And so, Lord, I pray by your Spirit you would maybe put someone on our mind. Maybe it's a conversation with our wife or our kids. But Lord, help us to live under the reality of the accountability that we have for the lives that we've been given. And may this be done with grace and truth and the power of your Spirit. In Christ's name, amen. Let's stand together.